I always say that the best thing about consulting are the people that you work with. You're always working with the best, pushing each other to learn more, do more, be more, and go even further. Which is why I'm very excited to be able to go through these conversations with some of our alumni who've gone on to even greater success beyond their consulting career, and learn from them about the high points, the low points, the achievements, the wins, and the lessons that we can all take and apply in our future journeys. J.K. Khalil, welcome to Unscripted.
Thank you so much, Karim. I appreciate it, and lovely to be here.
I'm looking forward to having our conversation because just like the title of our podcast, Unscripted, your career path is also unscripted if you look at it from the outside in. So I'm going to enjoy digging into that, hopefully, and shed some insights on how we got there. But before we get into any of this, and this is a question I had asked because we hadn't met before, is it JK or JK stands for something?
Okay. Wow. How much time do we have, I guess? So look, this is an interesting question in branding and geopolitics and sociology. The reason I go by JK is completely also kind of unscripted reason, unengineered reason, but it seems to work well. So the short answer is actually, turns out scientifically short brands are easier to remember and far more memorable than longer brands or longer names. So that's scientific, right? That's why even in the States, people shorten their names to Tom and Brad and, Jim and Tim. I think it's just much more memorable if your name is shorter. And even like most of the most famous CEOs have very short names. But it wasn't engineered. I learned this kind of like in retrospect. I was born in Lebanon during the Civil War. So my grandfather, in his infinite wisdom, said to my dad, "You should have your son should have a non-denominational neutral name," and they picked Jihad. When 2001 happened, I had a lot of international friends by the time I was an engineering student, and a lot of my friends from outside Lebanon started asking bizarre questions, and I started realizing, wait a second, I mean, times are changing. So when I moved to France, I actually camouflaged my name, literally with another name, which is now the name of my son. And that was my idea because I was worried that my consulting employer at the time in France would have a problem selling my name to the firms, to the banks and the insurance firms that I used to consult for. When I moved to the US, I applied for business school, and it was first name, middle name, last name, which in our culture would be Jihad, Khalil. And then they said preferred name. And I was like, oh, what would I do with preferred? We don't have a preferred name for me. I mean, I had like all my friends called me different kind of names, whatever you call people with my name in this part of the world. But then I thought, what if I just completely simplify it in such a way that I create no friction when I meet a non-Middle Eastern student / colleague in the United States? What would that be? And I started thinking about it. It took me a couple of weeks. And then I thought, why not do whatever the Westerners do with the JPs and the AJs and the JTs and whatever. So I just put first and middle name. Then I joined business school and all my friends would call me JK. Then the financial crisis happened in 2008. And I was on a panel, managed, so the business school put together a panel of students in front of a bunch of alumni. And I was explaining how difficult it was for an international student to get a job in the real world. The banks were not hiring, consulting firms were not hiring. I certainly reached out to Booz at the time, and they would not hire because the whole market was frozen from a hireability perspective. And there was a guy in the audience who raised his hand and he said, "So JK, you don't have a job. Let me help you get a job." And I was like, "Oh, thank you very much." I had no idea who the guy was. After the panel, I realized he was the CEO of Barclays, and so I had to send him my resume, and I sent it as JK. So I eventually got hired by Barclays here in Dubai, actually 2 blocks over. And I worked for 2 years with Barclays as JK. When I moved to Booz, I went back to my former name, and then I left Strategy and with my actual real name. But then I got hired by MasterCard, and the lady that hired me knew me from the Barclays days as JK. So she called me and she hired JK. And then I joined MasterCard. Until this day, I'm still with my corporate brand as JK, right? Obviously, I don't go like by JK in my real life, but it is kind of a corporate brand that stuck. So it's a bit of a corporate branding story filled with interesting kind of contextual nuances from our day and age. That's how we got here.
I don't come across a lot of people who, at a young age, think of themselves as having a personal or a corporate brand. So,
Yeah, forced, not by choice, I guess.
so maybe the whole aspect of the branding side is in the DNA as well.
Well, maybe, yeah.
Okay, cool. Now that we know where JK came from, and we've applied a lens of geopolitics, as you said, we'll move away from that one. Yeah, so another thing that you notice when you look at sort of your career path, trying to sort of look at all the companies on LinkedIn, is it's not linear, and most of the time it isn't. But it shifts from consulting to smaller companies to larger companies, banking. So clearly there is a finance team, but you didn't start with a finance team because you were in a computing or an engineering degree. So once you said the best way to predict the future is to create it.
Yes.
So is this something that you're applying as a philosophy as you chose your next steps, now looking back and trying to connect the dots? Or is it just luck? What is it that defined this path?
I think you can ask this question to anyone. And I think the answer will be pretentious at best, because I think people think that they have agency over their lives and their career. I don't believe in agency, and I'm like recently I've coined the terms I believe in quantum physics. When people ask me, what do you believe in? I believe in quantum physics. Because if you think about our lives as individuals and how they are stitched to so many different variables, it is very hard for any person to take any, or not even full ownership, any partial ownership even to any decision that happens to them. Right? So if you think about the whole concept of causality, it's also a little bit pretentious, because it assumes that, it's not actually pretentious, it's actually quite humble, because it justifies the fact that any decision that you make, you've already been kind of primed to make it. It was not really your decision, right? There was so many consequences of actions that took place around you by other people, by factors, even the climate, how you feel that day, what you've eaten, what your mom said to you when you were a child, what you saw your dad do. Everything that's happening is a very complex causal equation. For me, the simple answer is, when I look at my career, I cannot explain it better than I've been lucky and I really followed what my gut said. Because most career, you would see people doing things for like either very short periods of time, like 1-2 years. And I remember when we get those resumes across the desk, we always wonder, what is this person doing? Mm-hmm. And then you get people that do things for very large chunks, like 7 years here and 10 years there. And mine was a little bit different, because initially I wasn't convinced about anything. I mean, I did engineering degree, but I wasn't convinced I wanted to be a computer engineer. Mm. And then I launched technology, but I wasn't convinced that I looked like any of the other technology guys. All my friends went and did their business school, and they went into consulting and banking. I felt like I could be like them, but I'm something more. So I never wanted to straitjacket myself from the get-go. And I did things that actually a lot of my friends criticized me for, saying, oh, why are you doing that? Why don't you come with us to HEC? Why don't you come to ISEC with us, or LBS or whatever? And I'm like, I kind of feel like you, but I also feel like there's something else, and I didn't know what it was. And luckily, I was maybe curious enough to explore other avenues. So when I started with computer engineering, I felt like I liked the solutioning aspect of it, but not being a techie behind a keyboard. I moved to technology consulting, and I liked the engagement aspect with the customer and finding solutions to business requirements, but not so much the tech angle anymore. After business school, I got lucky to be hired into banking because of my previous technology banking consulting experience. And I actually learned a lot about banking because I was a chief of staff role, so I got to touch a lot of the business areas, and that allowed me to be more of a banker than a consultant for banks, which is what I got the call from Booz. They said to me, we're looking for a guy who actually did technology and banking, because they were building the digital banking and technology practice at the time. So when I joined that, I spent most of my time in the banking practice, because they needed someone who actually knew how banks worked and who was a banking insider. And they would say, oh, talk to the Barclays guy, and they would send me. I spent 4.5 years with Booz at the time, and then strategy, and I kind of became like one of their seniors in the banking practice, but also we did a lot of interesting topics, from risk to wealth management to private banking to transformation in banks, etc. So it was quite an interesting journey. And then when MasterCard came along, they called me and they said, we're looking for a guy who knows consulting, who knows banking, who can speak Arabic, who knows the region, who has a pedigree MBA, and who understands technology.
It's like they reverse engineered the job for you.
Exactly, and I said, you're looking for just one person, actually, and you're not going to find another person. And at MasterCard, what I ended up doing is I applied everything that I've learned, because when I sit down, most of my constituents are banks. When I talk technology, I understand it because I come from technology. but I'm applying business principles that I learned at Booz, and then strategy and that I learned from business school at the University of Chicago. So I'm applying all those, ingredients in kind of like my version of this job. And I'm still solving problems for customers. I'm still in that consultative mindset. I'm still in a position where I can help create and set the future, like you were saying. So I'm able to apply all of those in one space. And I guess that's the reason why I've been at MasterCard for 8.5 years without even feeling it. Right? So it sounds like it was a bit unscripted, but it may be so because for me, the prime principle was, is it making me happy and passionate and engaged enough for me to feel like I'm not working, I'm really enjoying myself. And all the experiences that I brought with me served me really well today. And I think, and a lot of people come to me asking for like career advice. And I say, follow your gut and your passion first and do the best that you can, because that is how you build your own career in a way that is centered with your values and what feels good to you.
I want to unpack a couple of things that you mentioned. So, as you were describing the different stages you were going through, you were saying things, I enjoyed sort of solving client problems or interacting with clients, but I didn't enjoy this. I enjoyed this. Was this something that you realize now, or was this something that you were always consciously taking or assessing yourself at? And because you mentioned yourself that some of the moves initially were very quick.
Yes, they were very
Were those deliberate moves, or was it just because of circumstances? Because I'm trying to get some, for people who might be listening or watching who are maybe at an earlier stage in their career, is this some people approach it differently. Some people just sort of go with the flow.
Look, 100%.
And some people are being very deliberate. So where were you?
And I don't mean to be very prescriptive, because I don't want people to think that they have to do exactly what I did. I mean, I think every person has to follow like their inner voice. There's a lot of inner voices in our heads, for granted, but there's one inner voice that makes you feel good, and it's your compass, your North Star. Initially, if I look back, what I would call it is, some people might call it, I remember how my dad would look at me when I say, I'm quitting, like I cannot do this tech job anymore, one of my earlier startups that I worked for. It just doesn't feel good to me. And he would look at me like, feel good? This is a job. You just go and do it. And I'm like, this doesn't feel right. Like, I cannot stand the culture. I can't gel with those people. I'm just not happy. Like, I'm happy when I sit down and solve the problem. But the second I get off my computer and have to talk to people, I'm just not in this space. So I think part of it, you could, if you were to ask my dad, maybe he would call it immaturity, right? And, follow your heart thing. But I think there's something to that. Because a lot of people that I speak to who are miserable in their careers are people who are really, really good workers, but they just not listen to their inner voice that says, you know what, this doesn't feel right. Just go do, if you're such a hard worker, go work hard somewhere else and you'll do just as well, but at least you'll be super happy, 10 times, 20 times happier. And I think the way that for the longest times as humans we have succeeded as a species is by actually following your passion and doing something great, for yourself, for your family, for your town, for your village, for your tribe, for humanity, as opposed to doing great work that you didn't like. I don't think anybody who was just a hard worker was brilliant. Einstein did his best creations pretending to work, as a clerk in the IP bureau. But really, he did his best work on the side. And actually, he wanted that boring job because, you know why? Because it gave him a lot of time on the side to do his research. So, that's an example of a guy who realized, I can do something that can put bread on the table. So it's kind of an entrepreneur, really, Einstein, right? But I'll do my best work on the side, and I'll sit down and think about these concepts. And there are so many examples. Steve Jobs, what does he say, right? He says, do what you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. There's something to that.
Yeah, I want to challenge this a bit. So, quoting another, so there's a guy that I'm sure you've heard of called Scott Galloway, who's a professor at NYU Stern, and he's a very outspoken person, author, podcaster. And he says, everybody who tells you follow your passion has already made their money, and they're just giving you bullshit that's going to wreck your life. You need to follow what you're good at, not what you love.
The funny thing about that is I've never heard anyone give the other advice. Say, nobody has ever said to you, just go work hard and don't follow your passion.
But that doesn't sound very sexy. So
it doesn't sound sexy, and nobody says it, right? But because look, you can work hard and you will go places. But the real question is, will you be also happy? Because it's very simple. I'm a consultant just like you, and I like to put things on a 2x2. And I always, when people come to me for career advice, I'm like, look, life is a 2x2. What are you trying to optimize for? Career success and happiness and health and wealth and all that stuff. So if you only solve for one, you can. But you can also solve for the other, by the way. I can go live on the beach and sell Havaianas and DJ for the rest of my life, and I'll make no money, but I'll be super happy. I'll have no impact on the world. Maybe I'll have no career success, nothing. So I'll have maximized for one axis. Why can't I just maximize for both? And I think to maximize for both, if that's of importance to anyone, you need to find something that you really, really, really love and it gets you going in the morning, and something that you can be really good at. Why not? I'm not saying it's the only way.
So you mentioned clearly that's clear conviction in terms of looking at career. You mentioned that you mentor a lot of people. I assume some of these people that you mentor are with you in MasterCard today.
Yes.
So have you ever gotten to the point where you give them this advice and they end up leaving?
Hasn't happened yet.
Okay. Is that because you're making sure that that's not the outcome of the advice, or is that because
I think working for I think first of all I work for a great company, and it's a great place to work for, and I think people that usually work for MasterCard, I only learned this because I've been there 8 years, and I have seen so many executives that have been at the firm far longer than I have, which tells you that this is a firm that looks after people and people are happy to work for. But also, I mentor a lot of young people. So some of them, and the beauty about MasterCard is a very wide organization. So some of them start in one place and they move to another. So within MasterCard, you can have a career, almost like a multidisciplinary career without leaving the firm. And that's something that very few firms, actually, not many firms can provide that. So maybe that's the reason why they stay longer, because they just, Mike, they come to me and say, oh, I want to be a consultant in MasterCard, and I want to grow in the consulting practice, which is what I thought I was doing when I joined them. Eventually, I moved to the market side and I managed the region. So your path could be very different. You can move into product and you can work on developing product innovation, or you could move into, you could move into just purely a sales role and, focus on being an expert salesperson in a very specific niche domain. So you can have a multidisciplinary kind of career at MasterCard, and maybe that's why people tend to stay for a long time, because they can invent their career multiple times and they can expand their boundaries over time and also pace it with their lives. So for instance, some people will sometimes take a year off, a sabbatical, sometimes they'll take a parental leave. So, companies today are also very mindful of that. I'm sure Strategy and as well. So they give you that latitude.
We have a lot more. Yeah. It's funny when sort of people like me who were with Booz earlier and our Strategy and now, and when we compare when we were sort of entry level or young, what it was like, what it meant to work and what your expectations were versus now. Yeah, it's definitely a different world, much better one from an employee's perspective. Absolutely. For sure.
And work-life balance.
True. Yeah. You mentioned mentorship a lot. Is that something that just comes naturally because you're approachable and so on, or is that something you do deliberately? And I see in a lot of stages of your journey also this, the idea of giving back. Where does that come from?
No, I think it's a mix of everything, Karim. I think you've covered it in your question. Initially, I think maybe because I'm a bit more approachable, people just came to me asking questions and they like the answer, so they keep coming back. And I think I've also matured in the way that I used to mentor. I used to mentor in a much more consultative way, and now also because of a lot of the personal work that I do. And I have many, executive coaches. I also have kind of mentors that are not very traditional, and I do a lot of deep kind of work with them on the personal side, on the identity and psychology side. I also feel like sometimes I tend to advise my mentees on that psychological aspect as well, because it kind of broadens the conversation from purely career equation focused to identity and personality and well-being, livelihood focused. So I think that when that expansion happens, people feel also, a lot of people come to my office and when they leave, they say, I feel like I'm at a shrink, and I feel like I'm sharing way more than I wanted. I'm like, but this is good, because you cannot have a holistic conversation if you don't touch on everything. I cannot come and say to you, oh, what do you want to be? I want to be this. Okay, you have to do these 3 things. It doesn't work like this. I think that's one aspect to it. I feel also, over time, I see the impact that others have had on me. Right? I just didn't show up here and everything worked out. I mean, I get a lot of feedback. I ask for a lot of feedback. I've jammed my nose in the door of many executives for them to allow me to have conversations with them to mentor me. So I feel like part of it is, as you said, I feel like it's important for me to give back and pass on this knowledge. I don't think anyone should hog knowledge. I think knowledge should be should be freely passed on to as many people as possible. And you know what? When people come asking for help, I want to help more. Because there's a lot of people that need help but don't ask for help, which frustrates me, right? And I'm not the kind of person that will walk up to someone and say, you know what you should do? You should do A, B, C, D, and I think everything will be... you cannot advise people until they ask for it. You know what I mean? So I think this part of it is appreciating and honoring that someone is coming and raising their hand saying, please guide me. I think it's important for us to help each other.
Yeah, so definitely another lesson we're taking away here for people in different parts of their career, or maybe earlier parts of their career, is ask for advice, seek out mentorship.
Absolutely. Okay. And I don't know why people don't do that as much as they should. Look, it's simple. I mean, ask, and if you don't ask, you're not going to get the answer. It's very simple.
Was there a key mentor or key figure in your career or in your life that had a big impact on you?
I've had so many, even from my childhood. I think I was always like a paranoid android, and I was always very anxious and didn't have the best sort of confidence in my image. I always imagined that I'm always behind or worse off than I actually was. So that lack of self-confidence made me, kind of continuously seek feedback, ask questions, and also maintain a relationship with my mentors for a very long period of time. A lot of people will come to me also, to your other point, and they will have a couple of mentorship sessions and then they disappear. There's a lot of those. There's the other kind. But I find I get more value from a mentor that sees me progress over time, because they also appreciate the journey. They know where I've come from. They know where I am in the journey, what else I have to work on. And they can give me good advice and bad. And they give me good feedback and bad. Like, oh, we really appreciate that you've done this, this, and this. Which I sometimes miss also the positiveness of that, right? And sometimes so that kind of gives you a little bit of a confidence boost. Like, oh yeah, I didn't pay attention I was working on this, but yeah, great, somebody noticed it. And that's you, but you could also work on this, and the other. And like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. So how did you manage it in your own career growth and journey? And that's really helpful.
Who had the biggest impact on you, and in what way?
I don't want to single out one person because I have so many mentors.
Or maybe name some drastic change that you embarked upon because of advice.
Okay. That's a really difficult one. You know what? Interestingly, I think that I've changed a lot my leadership style and my pace of execution versus kind of leading from behind when I became a father. Mm-hmm. I actually became a father when I was a consultant. And the way that I fathered my children initially was very much like a consultant would advise their customers, right? And their partners. And it wasn't...
Were there PowerPoints?
Yeah, it was not PowerPoints, but it was a lot of 2x2s. And everything was very kind of logical. I think over time, when I started realizing and seeing the reaction of my children as they grew older and how they're looking at me, there were a few incidents where I realized, wait a second, I'm missing a whole area here, which is, I guess, the more touchy-feely, the more emotional, the more EQ, less IQ part of it. And I started to spend more time thinking about that. And then I started realizing that that's also reflecting in my leadership style at work. Mm. So instead of showing up and, expecting everything to be kind of like a super duper PowerPoint like we have, and everything is in a framework and in 3 pillars, and we got the priorities and we got the execution plan, I started realizing that there's a bit of a human factor in it that as consultants we become almost like, robotic about, and we kind of completely discount. And so I think it was much less of a mentor, but more of a life journey that made me realize that there's a huge importance to EQ, to emotional leadership, to how you engage your team, to how you... And that mentorship is a big part of that, by the way, because I started investing more in mentoring the people around me, because you just realize that leadership is more about helping people become their best selves as opposed to telling them what to do. And I think that is a big change that, fatherhood kind of led me to... it was one of my bigger aha moments, let's just say.
Interesting. Talking of fatherhood, I saw in one of your posts that your daughter is a keen cook.
She is.
And she has a YouTube channel. I presume she has plans on becoming an influencer in the culinary industry.
So funny you raise that, because Layla, my 11-year-old, she probably got into cooking as a way to express her love to me and her closeness to me. Because I love to cook, right? I spend a lot of time in the kitchen. Her mom is a great baker, so she spends also a lot of time baking in the kitchen. So Layla is a great cook and a great baker. She's very comfortable around the kitchen, looking at recipes, doing things herself. And what I always say to her is, and what her and her mom, me and her mom, we say to her is, baking is an exact science. Like in baking, you got to follow the recipe. You can't deviate. You can't add a little bit more flour or less sugar or more butter or less whatever. If you do that, you completely create another product. In cooking, you can riff. You can do whatever you want, right? You add more salt, more pepper, less onions, more tomato sauce. And I think Layla, by kind of being maybe the elder child, was always much more structured. She was much more into baking. And when she came to the world of cooking, she started enjoying it because, oh, Daddy, should I put this much cheese? I'm like, whatever, you decide, you're the chef. And so she started exploring this part of herself where she has more agency over her decisions and gives her much more confidence to decide. And so one day she comes to me and says, I want to do this YouTube channel. And I say, okay, well, if you want to do a YouTube channel, I want to see 20 recipes on your list. And if you have 20 recipes, we can do 2 seasons, and every season could be 10 episodes.
That was the consultant speaking.
Exactly. The consultant immediately came out. And then I actually realized that I was being too consulting. But literally 20 minutes later, she came with a list of, a couple of dozen recipes. And so we started shooting it every Saturday and Sunday morning. We would put all the cameras in the kitchen and we start shooting the episodes. And we did a bunch of episodes. And then at some point, it started getting traction, and all of her friends knew, and the friends of her parents knew, and so she started a little bit feeling overwhelmed by by all the attention. And so she said, Dad, I'm going to take a break now. I said, okay, take a break. The consultant and me would have said, no, you committed, and there's 6 more episodes in this season. But then I immediately held myself back and said, no, I want her to decide to pause, and she'll probably decide either to continue later or not to. But that's again the kind of agency I was talking to you about before the episode is. I just want her to be responsible for her decisions and not feel the weight of someone else making her do things. And I wanted her to feel that I'm perfectly fine so that she doesn't feel like she has to do it for me either. So I said, you know what?
So you're a senior exec at a multinational at MasterCard, but at the same time, you're finding time to be shooting videos with your daughter. I'm sure you're also finding time to do stuff with your son. So is that deliberate again? This sort of making sure that you are carving out the time? What's your approach? Because we hear different.
It is very deliberate.
We hear different things, different advice. No, if you're younger, you should just work hard all the time, and then you say no. And then we have the other side, which is no. You need to make balance in your life because otherwise you'll burn out. Where are you on this scale?
Look, I think it depends. The answer is on this one again, and I don't want to be prescriptive. I don't feel like one formula fits everyone. What worked for me may not work for others. I maybe overweighed working hard for the first maybe a couple of decades of my career for sure. But because I was also trying to find a path for myself. So maybe I did in 20 years what people typically do in 30. But I was on a quest. I wanted to, because I associated also, and that's maybe partially, to a large part actually, upbringing. I wanted to associate my identity with a corporate persona. Right? I mean, I came from humble beginnings, so for me, work was very important. Dad always said to me, "You are what you do. Focus on creating impact, on being valued, being known for something." Which also Booth said to me at the time, "What is your platform? What are you going to be known for?" Right? So I always had this question lingering over my head: what are you known for? So I think yes, I overweighed work, but at some point also life hits you, family, and then you get less time because you have work and family, which both significant investments in time. And then you realize, wait a second, there are things that I want to do myself. So where is self in that equation? Right? So imagine 70% of your time is work, or actually more like 30% of your time is sleep, 40% of your time is work, 20% of your time is work, is family, sorry. What are you left for yourself? Sometimes that self is close to zero. And I think that's where people start realizing there's no balance. It was actually about a few years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago, when I was starting my career as a general manager with MasterCard early on, that I started realizing 2 things. A, I don't spend any time with myself, and B, it's a bit lonely. When you're kind of managing a business, it's kind of lonely because nobody else is managing that business, so you don't have a co-partner. You can call another guy managing another business and get some advice, which most people rarely do. And most people would be rarely available to give you that time. Your boss is judging you all the time. So it gets very lonely very quickly. So I started to look for other forms, and this is actually also what helped me expanding my sort of canvas of and spectrum of mentors, by the way, beyond just executive coaches. And then you start realizing that the happiness element of that 2x2 I drew earlier starts to shrink. And for me, the aha moment was, at some point, I really felt completely burnt out. And I felt like, really, I just want to run away from everything, literally. And it only changed when I started saying, okay, I'm dedicating this time for myself. Whether it is going to the gym 3 times a week, whether it is, I don't know, meditating 20 minutes every day, whether it is taking 2 hours on the weekend to just be by myself, whether I want to play music or paint or cook or just, go out for a drive by myself, like just protecting that self-time, because that is the only time that allows you to remember what you actually are when nothing else matters. Because the other thing that people do is they work super hard, and 99% of your identity becomes your corporate identity. Then one day, for one reason or another, either you have to slow down, retire, or change jobs. Then you'll have a real identity crisis when the person that you've been used to for most of your life is no longer.
Yeah.
And then what do you identify with? So now, to answer your question, maybe long, short, is I've been obsessing with finding new identities for my future that I can start to curate. The musician, the painter, the reader, the writer, the father, the husband, the friend, the son sometimes, which doesn't exist anymore, right? For my parents. And look, there's a lot of kind of tracks that I'm trying to feed so that, let's say in a decade or two's time, there's another identity or 2 or 3 that have, outgrown a little bit, like green shoots, that I can kind of step into, while my corporate identity maybe becomes less relevant. Maybe I become an entrepreneur also. Maybe I advise more. Maybe I go back to being a consultant. So I want to be a multi-identity kind of persona in the future that can lean into multiple things instead of marrying something and one day realizing it's all gone.
One other thing I also noticed about what you emphasize is being part of, engaged in the networks that have been there at different stages in your life. So you were very keen to do this podcast, for example, because you value being part of Strategy and alumni team. You're quite engaged in the Chicago Booth alumni efforts. What's driving that? What value do you get out of those, and what do you give?
I think it's all part of the big question as to how I got here. I think that incident with Fritz Seegers, who gave me that job on stage in 2009 to work for Barclays, sparked something in me that if I wasn't there at that point in time, and he wasn't there, and he was part of the Chicago network, how would I even be here right now? So if everything is interconnected and you think about it like this, you can't be blind to everything else that's connected to you. And so I think about humans like nodes in a network, and that network is very intricate and very complex. And I think the most successful nodes, which are the most successful humans, just like in any network, if you even take your internet network right here, your Cisco network, the most powerful node is the node through which most information flows. And so as a corollary to that, human networks are very important. And the person that can flow most amount of information through, it will be far more valuable to the network. So I try to create a lot of network and be part of other sub-networks. And I don't need to be the central node. I just need to connect it to those networks. And I think the power is to be connected to as many networks as you humanly can, because also there's a limit on your time and your bandwidth and your attention and value creation, so that information can flow through you and people see you as a valuable connector to other networks. So people see me as maybe the central node in the University of Chicago network. I am one of the many, hopefully successfully nodes within the Strategy and network. I'm one of the MasterCard node networks. I have my venture capital node. I have my mentorship node. I have my social, friends and social capital. All these nodes and how they interplay is what makes you very unique than from me, from the next person, and so on. So I think it's very important not to be totally focused on your own interests, because you matter more to the world around you than you actually think. At least that's what I think.
What does the Strategy and network get you?
Well, I mean, it's a great network. A lot of my peers today in the technology space are from Strategy and, right? We talk about Faris Aad, Chanto Cagnan. When you talk about others within, like say Ana Germanos at Google. So there's a lot of people that are directly in my space, but there's also a lot of people outside my space, and that enriches my network, because like For instance, I want to think today of real estate. I can call Rami, right, and say, hey, Rami, what's going on in that space in Saudi Arabia or in GCC. If I want to call someone in, I don't know, in the government, public sector space, I can call you up and be, hey, what's going on in this space or that space. So I think it enriches. Again, I don't need to chat to ChatGPT because I am connected to the best minds working in the best industries today in the region. So that also enriches the information flow that I have. It allows me to access networks that otherwise would be hard to access. And again, you're part of that whole information flow and intelligence that's kind of looking after this region. So I think it's pretty cool.
Okay. We sort of had discussed the fact you've been at MasterCard for some time, so clearly, and you like to do what you love doing, so clearly you're loving what you're doing. At a time when digital transformation in the financial service or in the financial world is quite fast and rapid, where do you see the opportunity? Is it the opportunities that you're loving about your job? Is it the role that a company like MasterCard and the role that you have that allows you to play and influence it? Where is it that you're loving, and where do you see the opportunity, and where do you see our region benefiting?
So it's a very good question. I see it maybe in three flavors. Okay, the first one is I think this is the most interesting time to be in the fintech industry and commerce in general. If you look at the last, many thousands of years of commerce, it was pretty boring. You have a product, I come to you, you try to market it, and then I come to you actually, and then I try to buy that product with whatever financing I have. Today, if you think about fintech, it is the kind of place to be, the sector to be in, and it's being disrupted every second. The amount of participation in the space is skyrocketed, right? Even governments are now playing in fintech. Any kind of merchant, whether it's a government merchant or whether it's your regular store on Deliveroo or Amazon. So everyone is participating in digital commerce, and that's creating an absolute exponential explosion in this space. So sector, amazing. Secondly, I work for a company that's really pushing the boundaries of what commerce will look like in the future. We were just going around the lab over here, and you saw those AIs. We have the same version of those AI kind of engines that are running conversational commerce, commerce of the future, helping our partners like banks and merchants enhance automation and intelligence in their own internal processes, how they, with co-pilots, how they can make their staff better when interfacing with customers, right? How you can make the wealth manager more intelligent when they sit with the customer, how you can make the customer service representative a bit more personalized in their approach when a customer calls in. So these are real things that are happening, and our organization at MasterCard is extremely involved in defining that kind of future, and also mitigating the risks of that future. So we're deeply involved as well in cybersecurity part of it, historically because we needed to protect a very, very large network, but also now as the world becomes much more interconnected, how do we invest in protecting the borders and preventing bad actors from accessing very delicate information like your financial information. When you transact, they don't transact on your behalf. They can now hack into your account, and through authorized fraud, they can take all your money. So how do you protect against that kind of world when the world is interconnected? And the third pillar, why I really like my job, is I think because, like I was saying to you earlier, I got to get all these different experiences and skill sets that I learned from my various experiences, whether it's on the technology side, on the consulting and advisory side, on the banking side, and innovation and co-creation, all that fun stuff for me that gets me going, and put it in one place, in that organization, in that sector, and it gets me going. So I guess it's working for me, and I hope everyone can find their own niche to get them out of bed in the morning and get them going.
Sounds like you get to be entrepreneurial while also being
exactly. That's what I call. Actually, that's exactly what I call. What I say to my team and what I call the company. I say this is a very entrepreneurial place. There's nothing that we cannot do, obviously, within the boundaries of what's acceptable, and it's really up to us in the markets to create the future. I mean, no global technology company can sit in a place in Silicon Valley or New York and pretend to invent the future. Each one of us in our own markets, our own communities, have the responsibility actually of defining our future and doing the best we can so that we can improve the quality of life and human experience in general.
Okay, we covered a lot in this unscripted journey. One question that I like to ask a lot of our alumni, because your stories are all unique, but at the same time, they're not ones that you could have predicted.
Right.
So 20-year-old JK, when you were in university, looking forward, would 20-year-old JK have seen this outcome?
Why? No. No way. Look, I'll tell you what I have seen. I had imagined how I wanted to feel when I was older. I did not imagine what. Yes, I imagined an executive life. I imagined like lots of travel. I imagined, being part of something big. But I mean, these are all dreams. So it was more of a feeling, I would say. Dreams are a projection of feelings, right? And if you think about it in this way, I really projected in my mind how I wanted to feel about it. And that's maybe why, now to answer your question, and it actually helped me think about things I've never thought about. So this is pretty cool. Maybe that's why every time I was doing something that was not aligned with that feeling and what I wanted to project, I couldn't sleep at night. I had sometimes sleepless nights. And that's how I know when I'm off and I cannot sleep and I'm overthinking and I'm exhausted, I know that there's something is off, that I have to change something, because otherwise I'm not aligned with myself. And I think a lot of people don't invest in listening to their bodies. And your gut is more intelligent than your brain, because the brain is part of the gut. But some people just don't listen. Those who do, I think it makes their life easier, because maybe some decisions that they will have to take will be more difficult, but eventually, it's part of learning and growing and evolving. So just listen to your gut, man. I still believe in it, despite you're an NYU Stern professor.
Sheikh Khalil, thank you very much for joining us on Unscripted.
Thank you. Lovely conversation. Thank you so much, Kareem.